Meu nome é Trevor Clochartaigh. Eu sou político de Sinn Féin na Irlanda. Muito obrigado pelo convite. É uma honra estar aqui. I'm sure that was terrible. You're very nice. You're very nice. Comrades, thank you for the welcome, and it's very good to be back in Lisbon with you. In the last number of years, the Irish people have been relatively quiet about the impact of austerity measures. However, in recent times, the sleeping giant has been awoken. A couple of weeks ago, 100,000 people marched on the streets of Dublin. This was the largest demonstration against austerity in Ireland since the crisis began. It was, on the face of it, a march against an unjust water tax being brought in by our government at the behest of the Troika. The model put forward has seen almost €1 billion spent on the setting up of a totally incompetent quango full of managers and consultants on bloated wages and with perks and bonuses more than most people's modest incomes. Irish Water was the brainchild of then Minister Phil Hogan, who also brought in a property tax for every household in our country, irrespective of ability to pay. And his reward was to be appointed the plum job as Irish Commissioner to the EU. Another one of the Juncker junkies. But in reality, this move by the government was the last straw for Irish citizens sick and tired of the taxes, charges and cuts imposed by the Fine Gael and Labour government to repay the debts of corrupt bankers. They've said enough is enough. The revolution has finally kick-started, and the government on Wednesday had to back down, admit that Big Phil Hogan made an absolute mess of it, that the newly formed quango is a disaster, and to rethink their policy in a very significant way after a highly effective campaign of protests, mobilisations and angry public meetings by the ordinary people of Ireland, and that will continue. Last night, I was at a meeting of over 1,000 hill farmers in the west of Ireland. These are sheep farmers. Now, these guys aren't exactly the sector of Irish society you expect to be starting a revolution, but they are planning to demonstrate in Brussels unless the Minister of Agriculture meets them within days and commits to changing his plans around CAP implementation, which will see their livelihoods destroyed. And they mean business. They previously picketed the constituency office of our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, for 12 days, and only stopped when given assurances that a more workable deal on supports would be done. But the Minister has since broken that promise, and they won't back down this time. These protests are an expression of the anger that people feel against a government without any sense of fairness. After 6 long years of spending cuts and tax hikes, of unemployment and emigration, of bank bailouts and golden handshakes, people are saying no more. At the end of 2010, public anger was at fever pitch. The incompetence and corruption of the previous Fianna Fáil government made people realise the need for change. On the streets and in the polling booths, people voted for that change. In 2011, the newly elected Fine Gael and Labour government promised a democratic revolution. They promised investment in jobs and services, and they promised fairness. But what do we get? The same old economic incompetence and political cronyism that came before. But something is changing in Ireland. The more people hear talk of economic recovery, the more it jars with the reality that their own lives are not getting better. The more the government spins the line that we have finally turned the corner, the more people are asking why they have less money in their pockets at the end of the week. In Ireland this year, servicing the state's debt will cost the taxpayer €8 billion. Much of this is the cost of our government's failure to deliver a deal on the banking debt as promised in the June 2012 European Council Summit meeting. There is a recovery taking place. The figures bear that out. But it is a recovery of the few, not the many. It is a two-tiered, two-speed recovery. Just as this year's budget in Ireland is a two-tier budget. This year, our government were in a position to deliver a neutral budget for the first time in 7 years. No extra deficit reduction measures were needed. They could have introduced a budget that would have eased the burden on the vast majority of people, a budget that would stimulate the domestic economy and start the renewal of public services. But instead, they continued to favour the most well-off in Irish society. Tax cuts that benefit the better off, while the rest are left to rot. Sinn Féin believes that a better, fairer, more equal and prosperous Ireland is possible, but that cannot be achieved on the basis of the policies our government is following. Yes, the Troika are happy with what our government have announced, because this brand of Milton Friedman economics is the common agenda across all of the bailout countries. I'm very conscious that the impact of austerity on people in Portugal and Greece in particular have been probably even more cruel than in Ireland and the other bailout countries. But Irish people are suffering unnecessarily when Irish society continues to privilege the few over the many. It will continue as a society for the elites and not for citizens. Poverty, homelessness, health and education inequalities, unemployment and emigration will still be the daily reality for tens of thousands of people. After almost 4 years in government, there are 28,000 less young people in employment in Ireland than when they took office. In the first 6 months of this year, they only created 5,500 net new jobs. And a massive 374,800 people are still stuck on the dole. Over 200 people, mainly young, continue to emigrate every single day in search of work and a better future. 1 in 7 working people in Ireland are living at risk of poverty. 1 in 4 people live in a jobless household. And these are the families that our government expect to pay water charges. There is no recovery for the families with only €8.75 left each week after the essential bills are paid. And at a time when children are being forced to sleep in cars, tents, hotel beds or family floors because of a lack of investment in housing, our government chooses to cut the top rate of tax to benefit the wealthy. Here we have the neoliberal Troika austerity policies still being peddled out, even though our government this year had a chance to give something back to its most needy citizens. Quite clearly, an end to austerity does not mean an end to austerity policies. Sinn Féin this year again put forward a fully costed alternative budget, showing a fairer and more sustainable way of meeting the state's fiscal targets. Our alternative budget committed to putting €800 million back into the pockets of ordinary workers through the abolition of the property tax and water charges. In our proposals for 2015, we focused on raising the living standards of the most vulnerable, increasing investment in disability services, reversing our crisis in frontline healthcare, and making education more affordable. We sought to stem the tide of youth emigration. Our proposal was a budget that would help rebuild our economy, renew our society, and repair our communities within the deficit targets dictated by Troika policy. Unfortunately, the Finance Minister has once again failed to take on board our substantial proposals. But the people have taken note. There is hope, as the winds of change are once again blowing. The people are seeing through the lies and the deceit of this government. A century on from the Easter Rising of 1916, which sparked the beginning of the Irish Revolution, when the women and men of my country dared to dream of a better future, the comparison with today's political class could not be starker. When the government recently launched their plans to commemorate the 1916 Rising in the GPO in Dublin, where the main battle was fought with the force of the British Empire outside, the government of the day today had to contend with the noise of angry water charge protesters drowning out their empty festivities. I'm quite sure that the signatories of our Declaration of Independence would have been turning in their graves. But the political landscape in Ireland is changing dramatically. Sinn Féin in the recent elections across the 32 counties of Ireland, north and south, got more votes and has more elected representatives now than any other party on the island. In the most recent opinion poll in the south, we were the largest party in the state for the first time ever. So Sinn Féin has become a major political force in Ireland, in government in the 6 counties in the north, and the only real opposition at present in the south, and a credible alternative to lead a future government. 30 years ago, that was unthinkable. We also now have an MEP representing every man, woman and child on the island of Ireland. In the European Parliament, our group, as Marissa has said, GUI NGL, has gone from 35 to 52 MEPs. And I'd like to take this opportunity as well to congratulate all our GUI NGL colleagues who are here and who were equally successful. Mashiv. This mandate has been given to us all by the citizens as an endorsement of our policies that oppose crippling austerity and the neoliberalism agenda being driven by the EU establishment. We must now work together with other GUI NGL partners to strengthen coordination among the forces of the European left. We must build on our common aims and not lose sight of who the political enemy is. Their most popular tactic and our most common challenge is divide and conquer. We as parties must not be distracted or overcome by this at home or in Europe. Sinn Féin as a party are in the unique position of being in government in Belfast, in the north of Ireland, in a power-sharing arrangement, and in opposition to the government in Dublin in the south. Our ministers and parliamentarians in the north have been equally challenged and a lonely voice in fighting austerity policies being imposed by the British government from Westminster on citizens in the north. We have fought savage Tory cuts with little support from others in the Assembly. Politically also, the institutions in the north have had very difficult times of late, with little progress being made. The Democratic Unionist Party and their leadership in particular have sought to frustrate and block genuine social and economic progress due to their domestic fears of attack from electoral enemies in smaller anti-Good Friday Agreement parties. This and issues over flags, emblems and marches, as well as a lack of genuine engagement in talks about legacy issues, have put the Assembly in real jeopardy. From a European perspective, Ireland is unique in having had so many referendums on EU treaties down through the years. Sometimes it took more than one referendum to deliver the result that Brussels wanted. Sinn Féin opposed each treaty on the basis that they were leading to an unregulated and unaccountable Europe. In Ireland's case, that has led to the disastrous decision taken under EU pressure to bail out our banks. Ireland have been portrayed by the EU establishment as the good boys of Europe, who, according to our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, went mad partying, came begging to the Troika, and then exited the bailout with a pat on the head from our European masters. In Ireland, we know that the Troika bean counters may be gone, but Troika economics certainly haven't. Our vision for Europe is of national democracies working together, respecting each other's sovereignty and having self-determination. The actions of the EU since the beginning of the financial crisis have shown that it is not a force for a positive social Europe. Left parties across Europe must now work primarily in their own country, but also at a European level to bring about real reform. The European Union is in crisis, an economic crisis, a social crisis, a political crisis. Poor design, bad policies, and incompetent leadership are to blame. And Big Phil is certainly a good example of that. The result has been an assault on the living standards of low and middle-income families across Europe, the demonisation of those unable to find work and dependent on social welfare, and the asset stripping of public services and utilities on which many of us rely. We must continue to provide alternative and better leadership. To make matters worse, political elites across Europe want to centralise more power into the EU institutions. They claim that this is the only way to resolve the crisis. We must use our strengthened mandate to call a halt to the failed policies of the Brussels consensus. The European election results are a signal to the political elites that our people have had enough. Now we must dream big dreams and use our mandates cleverly and wisely. Comrades, now is the time for a new direction in our countries and in the EU institutions. Now is the time to end the Brussels power grab, to rein in the Commission and return powers to the Member States. Now is the time to halt the attack on wages and conditions of working people and to promote a basic threshold of decency for all and put in place real supports for those forced out of work by the policies of austerity. Now is the time to rebuild our public services and defend our public utilities, to ensure that people get the services they need in a fair and efficient manner. Now is the time, and now is our time. Thank you. Obrigado.